Welcome to our workshop for essay number 1. In this particular workshop, we want to look at the organization and the structure of our rhetorical analysis. In order to get ready for the learning ahead, you want to make sure that you have out two things. First, you want to make sure that you have the first draft of your essay out and have access to it as we walk through this workshop. And two, make sure that you have something to take notes with. This is an interactive workshop. Therefore, in order to get the most out of it, you want to make sure that you have the necessary tools to engage with the content. So to get started, we want to make sure that we understand the goals for our workshop. So to do this, somewhere in your notes, we want to add what you should be able to do as a result of this particular workshop. The first thing you should be able to do is to identify an effective organizational structure for the rhetorical analysis. The second thing you should be able to do is to describe the function of the organizational structure for the rhetorical analysis. And then the third thing you should be able to do is to apply your understanding of the organizational structure to move your essay from draft 1 to draft 2. So as you see, this particular workshop will walk you through not only being able to identify what our structure should look like, but you should be able to describe the function of each of the pieces and then apply that understanding to move your essay from draft 1 to draft 2. And it's important to understand these goals and even to have them written in your notes so that when we get towards the end, you can see where you are in relation to the goals that we set for the workshop. So as we get started, I would like for you to pull out your first draft and either with, if you're doing it digitally or if you've got a paper copy, highlight, underline, annotate the following. The first draft was meant for you to analyze that speech that you chose. So here's what I'd like you to do. Go ahead and highlight and annotate where in your first draft you describe the overall purpose of the speech that you chose. The next thing I would like for you to do is to go ahead and highlight, annotate, where you describe the primary audience of the speech that you chose. Next, you want to be able to describe or highlight and annotate where in that draft, where in your analysis, you describe the context of the speech. Remember, that's where you have described the place and time of the speech. And that goes along with that idea of exigence. In other words, why did that speech need to take place at that moment? What was happening to cause that speech to happen? So in other words, what was the speaker responding to in that speech? And then what I want you to do is just jot some notes if you don't have this in your analysis already, or you could stop the video and do a little free write. Do you feel as though the speech achieved its purpose for its primary audience? Once you've answered that question, now answer the question, how do you know? What is it that the speech did with regards to the way it was written that led you to believe that it did achieve its purpose for its primary audience? So how do you know? Go ahead and stop the video if you need to in order to complete everything on this page. This will be important for us as we move forward. So now let's think about how we shape our rhetorical analysis. This particular piece is an essay. It's a rhetorical analysis essay. So let's think about what an essay is. An essay is a piece of writing or text that presents the writer's ideas. It can be as short as 500 words, or it can also be 5,000 words or more. An essay can come in many shapes and sizes. For this project, our essay is going to be a rhetorical analysis. We spent a lot of time last week introducing or thinking about what a rhetorical analysis is. So now what we want to do is we want to think about a rhetorical analysis as it relates to writing the essay itself. And for that, we want to think about what all essays include. And for the most part, it comes down to 3 pieces that we're going to break down further in just a minute. We have an introduction, you have a body, and you have a conclusion. Those are the three parts of every essay. Now we're going to break down what that intro and body and conclusion for this essay do in just a minute. But one thing that we think about is we shape the intro and body and conclusion through this idea of focus paragraphs. Remember from last week, focus paragraphs are those chunks of text that we use the metaphor of being like a room in a house. Each room serves a clear purpose, and the things inside it should help it achieve that purpose. So when we think of strong paragraphs that we organize into our essay, we want to make sure that those strong paragraphs are organized in such a way that they focus on one discussion topic and they fully develop that discussion topic before moving on to the next one. Remember, we use the metaphor of weak paragraphs as like dorm rooms, where you've got a lot of different things crammed inside that space, but no real development to them. So just as you wouldn't keep your bed in a kitchen, you shouldn't have sentences in a paragraph that don't help that paragraph achieve its purpose or to develop the main idea or main point. Now, many times I get asked, how many paragraphs should my essay be? And my answer is always the same. I don't know, because it depends on how you have organized your essay. So when we think about those three parts of an essay, introduction, body, and conclusion, those are just meant to define sections of the text, not to define a specific number of paragraphs. For example, you could have an essay where the introduction is one paragraph, or it could be several paragraphs, depending on the length of the overall essay and how it's shaped. Same thing with the body of the essay. The body of an essay can be 3 paragraphs, it could be 12 paragraphs. It depends on how it's been organized and the length of the essay. So we want to think in terms of focus paragraphs and how we use our organization in order to structure that versus trying to say, oh, I need to make sure that I have 1 intro paragraph, 3 body paragraphs, and 1 conclusion paragraphs. It may end up that way, but not necessarily, and it certainly does not need to fit into that constraint. So we want to kind of keep that in mind as we organize our text. So let's think about the rhetorical analysis. We'll start with the introduction. So as with any type of writing, there's more than one way to organize your text. With that said, you'll want to cover the following in your initial paragraphs. In the introduction. Now again, your introduction may be just 1 paragraph. It may be 2 paragraphs. It depends on how you're organizing it. But in the introduction of your essay, you need to clearly state the text you're analyzing, give some important background information about its history or development. The introduction can be a good place for a quick narrative, but what you really want to think about is making sure that in the rhetorical analysis, the introduction includes the author, the exigence, the audience, the purpose, and the context. The last thing in the introduction is going to be your thesis statement. And here's where we want to really think strategically. Why would we put the thesis statement in the last part of the intro? Because it provides the focus for your audience before they go into the body of your text. So remember, your thesis is what you're going to claim as the analysis, your overall analysis. Those are the conclusions that you're drawing based on the results of the analysis. So if you remember back from that question on the free write screen, I said, do you feel as though the speech achieved its goal, the purpose for its intended audience? And why do you believe that? That's what you're going to use in order to shape that thesis. So let's take a look at this example. So as I read, I want us to think about, in this example, does it clearly state the text being analyzed? Does it provide some summary information? Does it provide information about the rhetorical situation? And does it provide a thesis that tells us the overall conclusion the writer drew about their analysis? As you can see, and I've kind of given you some highlights with them color-coded, you can see that throughout this particular example, the writer has shaped the introduction in order to really introduce the audience to the speech that they're analyzing, provide the exigence for the speech, the purpose, the audience, a little bit of summary, and then the thesis. So in this particular example, it says in 1962, the notable civil rights leader Malcolm X addresses his black brothers and sisters in order to empower them, address the inequities or inequalities plaguing the nation, and call for action. This address is given after a Nation of Islam member dies due to a confrontation with the LAPD. Malcolm X utilizes his reputation and charisma to amplify his message, allowing for his African American audience to desire reform. Though his audience encompasses not only those present, but includes black adults and young adults in the 1960s listening to it. The rhetor serves to address the internal problems with the African American community before he addresses police brutality. African Americans in the 1960s lie aware of the current oppression they are under, yet Malcolm X strives to garner support from the quiet and fearful. Simultaneously, he uses his affiliation with the Nation of Islam to capitalize on his message of self-love and unity. In the 1960s, Malcolm X served as a representative for the Nation of Islam, an organization promoting black nationalism in Islam. To note, many African Americans during this time viewed Malcolm X's teaching as radical and felt change would not occur, fear igniting these beliefs. The rhetor first introduces the importance of ideological action through unity and self-reflection to ultimately unite his audience against oppression and police brutality. Throughout the composition, Malcolm X justifies his purpose while inspiring his audience and leaves them empowered for a better unified future. As you can see, the thesis tells us that the writer is going to analyze the text through the lens of the conclusions that they drew, that they inspired the audience, leaving them empowered for a better unified future. Now the body of the text is going to analyze for us how Malcolm X empowered for a better unified future. So you're going to see those things throughout that particular piece. So in this example, you see that the writer took the time to really bring the audience into the piece, provide each of those parts, the exigence, the audience, the purpose, provide a little bit of summary before leaving us with the thesis, and that brings us to the focus of the body of the text. So now we think about the body paragraphs of your rhetorical analysis. So there's lots of ways you can organize the body of your text, and that is completely up to how you have framed your thesis. Remember, the goal of the body is to present the parts of the document, give an extended analysis of how that part functions, and suggest how the part ties into the larger point, i.e., your thesis. So use your thesis to help guide the body of your text. The body of your essay should present various points or claims about your analysis and then dive into the examples that speak to that point. Then explain how your example epitomizes your point. So for example, you can think of it like this. Provide the point. That's introduce the topic of the evidence presented in the paragraph. Develop the idea expressed in the topic. Then give some evidence. Provide specific examples from the text that speak to the topic. Then provide your explanation or analysis. In other words, explain how the specific examples epitomize your topic, and then link it, connect or anchor it to your thesis. So let's take a look. As we look at this, think about, does this body paragraph provide a point and develop the point? Does it provide evidence and examples? Does it provide explanation and analysis? And does it provide a link or anchor to the thesis? Malcolm X shouts, "We are oppressed, we are exploited, we are downtrodden, we are denied not only civil rights, but also human rights." Through this claim, he wants African Americans to remember the oppression they live in and not accept it. The use of "we" in his speech serves as an example of identification. He wants the listeners to identify with him and the many blacks currently facing the same hardships. The unifying word reassures the listeners that they are not alone and provides hope that change can be actualized. The quote further creates bodily experience. Audience members connect and also feel the rhetor's anger and rage. Unity lies as the theme that permeates throughout the rhetor's composition. African American oppression can be eradicated when they come together against the common enemy, Malcolm X proclaims. The orator begins to unite his audience against the common enemy by first identifying their shared oppression and hardships. So what do we see here? The organization of this paragraph is such that, in this case, the writer decided to begin with the example, then give the point, and then the explanation and analysis, and then the link. So we see that there's multiple ways to organize the paragraphs. You don't have to initially start with a point. You can start with the evidence or example. That's a complete choice to the writer and how the particular paragraph or how that section is flowing. But notice the analysis. Notice how well this writer dove into this particular example with regards to even just the word we and why Malcolm X used that word. That's part of the rhetorical analysis. You're bringing together or you're analyzing the way in which a text is brought together to decide whether or not it actually meets its purpose. In this particular example, the author is really emphasizing the use of we in order to bring about that unifying theme that we saw earlier in the thesis. Here's another example. In this particular example, the writer decided, and this is the same essay by the way, the writer decided to begin with the point and then provide evidence and then some analysis and then some more evidence and then some more analysis and then link it to the thesis. So you can see that in this case, the writer says throughout the composition, Malcolm X capitalizes on the purpose of his message by narrowing on his claims. Deliberately, in his word choice and delivery, he claims there is a lack of unity and need for unification to combat oppression. Notice a couple of things. The point that the author is going to make in this particular paragraph is based on the analysis of word choice and delivery, and it's linked to the thesis under that framework of unity. Only in this case, where the writer is thinking about the fact that there is a lack of unity. So then you're going to see those examples speak to that particular point. You'll notice just by color coding that the explanation and analysis is a very large part of this particular paragraph, as it was with the other one. And you definitely want to keep that in mind. The analysis is the part that is you providing the evidence to support the claim. So in this case, the writer is making this claim that Malcolm X capitalizes on the purpose of his message by narrowing in on his claims. Deliberately in his word choice and delivery, he claims there is a lack of unity and need for unification to combat oppression. That's the author, the writer of this particular essay example. That's the claim in this paragraph. Now the author needs to back it up. And they do that by providing two separate examples with an extensive analysis for each, all underneath that one main point. And then as you see in the bottom, they link it back to the thesis again, and it also transitions them to the next body paragraph. Now these are just two of the body paragraphs of the particular essay example that they came from, but they're two examples that really show how, one, you can organize to make sure that you've got point, evidence, explanation, analysis, and link, but they don't have to go into a particular order. It just depends on how you would like to organize your text. So now let's think about the conclusion. And the conclusion of the rhetorical analysis essay operates similarly to other kinds of essays. In your conclusion, you want to restate your main points and explain why they are important, reaffirm your thesis, And be careful, we don't just copy and paste the thesis down there. When I say reaffirm, you're speaking about it in a different way, keeping the same thesis point, but speak about it in a way that you know you've already brought your audience down through the text. So reaffirm your thesis and how your main points support it. For this project, you might think about ending the essay by broadening the context or connecting it to today in some way, if it's appropriate or if you would like to. So the example for the particular essay that we've been looking at, we want to think about if this conclusion provides some overall discussion regarding the text's main points, and then do we think it reaffirms the thesis and how the main points support it. So in this particular example, Malcolm X's composition serves as a prelude to his fight against oppression. This composition serves to garner support and provide ways his 1960s black audience can take action. The rhetor creates an ideological call to action and does not mention a plethora of physical action measures. He strategically neglects mentioning, protesting, or legislative reform in order to focus on unity, self-reflection, and empowerment. Vocalizing grievances to the white man lie as the only physical action he wants his audience to take. In turn, the audience members are inspired and demonstrate a willingness to implement the rhetor's key points into their life. Ultimately, Malcolm X ensures the distribution of his purpose and claims are receptive to his audience, thus allowing for his future ambitions against oppression to be supported. So I'm going to leave this one up to you on whether or not you feel as though the writer provided some overall discussion regarding the text's main points and reaffirms the thesis and how the main points support it. You can kind of come back and use this as an example as you begin to shape your next draft. So now I want us to think about if whether or not in this particular workshop, video workshop, we achieved the goals that we set out to do at the beginning. For example, do you feel as though you're able to identify an effective organizational structure for the rhetorical analysis? Are you able to look at or describe the different ways and the function of the structure, thinking, introduction, body, and conclusion, but then go further than that? Were you able to jot down some notes and be able to go back into those notes with regards to how you would shape those different body paragraphs, how you would shape that introduction, what that thesis might look like? And then how comfortable do you feel in applying your understanding of this organizational structure to move your essay from draft number 1 to draft number 2? Now, you can absolutely come back to this essay or to this video to help as you walk through this next drafting process. So please use this as a resource as you continue to draft. Now you're ready to begin moving the draft from number 1 to number 2. So you want to think about as you evolve from 600 to 1200 words, now start thinking about what composing choices the composer makes in the text. How are the choices connected to the composer's purpose? How are these choices used to influence the audience? So these are some of the things that you'll start to consider as you shape your essay into the essay structure of intro, body, and conclusion. But remember, in order to draft that introduction, specifically the thesis, you will have had to have done the analysis of the speech itself. Go back into the example in this particular video so you can see that in order for that writer to craft the thesis statement of their essay, they had to make sure that they had the analysis completed. Now you're ready to take off. Draft that second draft for this particular essay. And we'll see you online. Thank you.